Okay, picture this. A nuclear power plant, right? But instead of needing, huge areas of land, it floats out on the ocean.
Yeah, it sounds a bit sci-fi, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's actually moving beyond just concepts now.
Exactly. It's becoming a real thing, floating nuclear power plants, or FNPPs.
And there's a market developing around them with real numbers and projections.
Right. And that's what we're diving into today, the global market for these things. We're using an excerpt from a market report as our guide, one that focuses specifically on FNPPs.
Our goal here is really to pull out the key insights. What does this market actually look like now? Where is it predicted to go?
What's pushing it forward? And importantly, what are the roadblocks?
Exactly. Trying to get the story behind the data presented in the report.
Okay, so let's set the stage. What are the big numbers the report gives us?
Well, it values the global market for these floating plants at USD 214.5 million.
Yeah.
That's for 2025, so basically right now.
Just 7.2 billion. Okay. And where's it headed?
It's projected to grow quite a bit. They're forecasting it'll reach almost $12.4 billion, USD 395.85 million, to be exact, by 2033.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a jump in just 8 years. What kind of growth rate is that?
That works out to a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR, of 7.00% between 2025 and 2033.
7%. And the report links this mainly to clean energy demand.
Yeah, fundamentally, the increasing global push for clean, sustainable energy sources is cited as the major driver.
Which makes sense. Fits right in with, decarbonization efforts everywhere.
Totally.
Okay, so that's the overview. Now let's dig into some specifics the report breaks down. First up, the technology. What kind of reactors are we talking about here?
Well, the analysis points pretty clearly to pressurized water reactors, PWRs, as the dominant tech for FNPPs, at least through this forecast period.
PWRs. Why them?
It comes down to their track record, really. They're proven, used in tons of land-based plants, seen as having a good safety record, efficient.
So familiar territory.
Exactly. It's a mature technology. And the report suggests that makes them seem like a reliable, adaptable foundation for putting on a floating platform, minimizing risks like radiation leaks.
Okay, so the established workhorse is leading. But is there anything else, maybe newer tech, that's growing faster?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The report highlights small modular reactors, SMRs, as the fastest growing segment technology-wise.
Ah, SMRs. We hear that term a lot these days. What makes them stand out for the floating application, according to this report?
Well, it's their characteristics. They're compact, which helps on a platform. They often have enhanced, sometimes passive safety features.
Right.
And crucially, lower capital costs kind of to building a giant custom reactor. Plus, that modular aspect means components can often be built in a factory.
Ah, factory production. That helps with speed and maybe consistency.
Yeah, shorter construction times, potentially fewer headaches with on-site regulations for certain parts, makes them scalable and pretty well suited for offshore deployment, the report argues.
That does sound like a good fit for offshore. Okay, so moving from the tech inside, what about the overall size, like the power output of these plants? Small, medium, large.
The report says the medium-scale segment is the most prominent right now.
Medium scale, how do they define that?
They define it as plants with a capacity between 100 and 500 megawatts.
Okay, 100 to 500 megawatts. So that's the biggest slice currently. Is it also the fastest growing slice?
It is, yeah. According to their projections, that medium-scale category is expected to expand at the quickest pace.
Interesting. Why that specific range? What's the advantage?
The report suggests it hits a kind of sweet spot. Powerful enough for, say, a coastal community or industrial site,
Right.
but maybe more flexible and economically easier to handle than a really massive gigawatt-scale plant.
So a balance between power and practicality.
Exactly. Good for decentralized power, where maybe connecting to a huge grid is tough or super expensive, like remote spots or offshore uses. Got it. Not too big, not too small. Makes sense. So that leads to the why the applications. What are these floating plants primarily being used for? Well, the number one application, holding the biggest market share by far, is power generation.
Straightforward electricity.
Yep. Directly linked to that core driver we mentioned, needing reliable, low-carbon power, especially where traditional land-based options are difficult.
Okay, makes sense. Powering communities, industry. Is there another use case the report flagged as maybe up and coming or growing fast?
Yes, actually. It specifically calls out water desalination as a rapidly growing application segment.
Desalination. That's interesting. How does a nuclear plant help with that on a barge?
Well, nuclear plants generate a lot of heat, right? Even
Yeah.
when they're making electricity.
Mm-hmm.
That waste heat, or even just the electricity itself, can power the desalination process, which needs a lot of energy.
Ah, I see. So you co-locate them.
Exactly. You put this reliable, clean energy source offshore, right next to where you might need fresh water, and use it to power desalination facilities. The report sees this as a potentially big deal for water-scarce regions.
Yeah, that combination power and water that could be really vital in some places. Okay, speaking of places, let's look at the map. Where is this market biggest right now?
According to the data in the report, North America has the largest share currently, over 40% of the global revenue.
40%. Wow. What's the dollar figure on that?
They put it at USD 2,885.80 million for 2025.
And why North America? What's driving it there?
The report mentions strong government support, significant investment in clean energy generally, and ongoing R&D, especially in the U.S. around modular reactors.
Okay.
And for Canada, it mentions interest in providing resilient power to remote or maybe disaster-prone coastal areas.
Right. So over 40% there. How do the other big regions stack up? Europe.
Europe's next, yeah. Holding over 30% of the revenue, which they estimate at USD 2,164.35 million this year. Growth drivers mentioned there include energy reliability needs, like in the UK, and interestingly, a surge noted in Germany related to investments in advanced nuclear tech. Russia also features significantly in their European market data.
And then Asia Pacific, is that where the fastest growth is happening?
That's what the report projects, yes.
Yeah.
Asia Pacific holds around 23% of the revenue, now about USD 659.34 million in 2025.
Okay, so smaller share currently.
But projected to make the biggest gains. It's forecast to have the highest CAGR, expected at 9.0% through 2033.
9%. Why so fast there?
Just soaring energy demand across the region.
Yeah.
Especially noted for island nations and remote coastal areas. China is mentioned as a major player investing in advanced nuclear.
Right.
And India is projected for high growth too, linked to government initiatives promoting nuclear energy.
So North America leads now. Asia Pacific is the one to watch for growth. What about Latin America, Middle East, Africa? Are they in the mix?
They are, yeah, those smaller shares. Latin America holds just over 5%, valued at about USD 360.73 million. Brazil is mentioned for strategic interest in offshore energy. Argentina for alternative energy efforts.
Okay.
The Middle East and Africa together make up around 2%, estimated at USD 144.29 million in 2025.
And within that?
The report points to potential growth in the Middle East, driven by government investments, especially GCC countries. And in Africa, South Africa's market is linked to a focus on sustainable, maybe off-grid solutions. So smaller markets, but still part of that global picture.
Definitely a global interest then, even if concentrated now. And it all seems to come back to that need for clean, flexible power.
That's the core driver, yeah.
But the report also listed some other specific drivers, didn't it? Beyond just clean energy needed.
It did. One key thing highlighted is the mobility and flexibility these plants offer.
Right, you can potentially move them, unlike a land-based plant.
Exactly, a different kind of siting flexibility. Then there's the energy security angle, growing concerns about having stable, continuous power.
And nuclear provides that baseload, unlike some renewables.
Right, consistent power.
Yeah.
And finally, as we touched on with SMRs,
Yeah.
just ongoing technological advancements, making the reactors safer, more efficient, potentially more viable.
Okay, so flexibility, security, better tech, those are the tailwinds. But, there are always headwinds, especially for something this novel and complex. What did the report pinpoint as the main restraints?
Number one is cost, high capital and operational costs.
No surprise there.
Yeah. Developing, building, maintaining these things, especially offshore.
Yeah.
It's a huge investment. Fuel, waste management, security. It all adds up. The report notes this can make them struggle to compete on price alone against some other sources.
Cost is always a big one for major infrastructure. What else?
Regulatory hurdles are another major one.
Yeah.
Getting approvals from potentially multiple agencies for an offshore nuclear facility. It's complex. It takes time.
I can imagine.
And tied to that, there's public perception. Overcoming concerns about nuclear safety, waste disposal, environmental impact, especially in the ocean, that remains a significant challenge. It can slow things down or even stop projects.
Understandable concerns, given the history and the marine setting. Okay, so beyond those direct drivers and restraints, did the report mention any broader market trends influencing things?
Yeah, it noted this rising interest in using FNPPs specifically for off-grid and remote power needs.
Leaning into that mobility aspect.
Exactly. Places where extending the traditional grid is just too difficult or expensive. And this all fits into that bigger global trend of focusing on sustainability and low carbon energy,
Mm.
positioning these floating plants as, one potential tool in the toolbox.
It really highlights that tension, doesn't it? Clear potential benefits, clean power, mobility, water maybe, versus these really significant challenges like cost, regulation, public buy-in.
Definitely.
The report also touched briefly on some external shocks, mentioned COVID-19 and global trade issues. How did those ripple through this market?
Well, for COVID, the report described a bit of a mixed bag. Initially, yeah, delays, disruptions, supply chains messed up, economic uncertainty, movement restrictions.
Standard pandemic problems.
Right. But then it also kind of highlighted how important energy resilience and security are, and the need for low-carbon options. So the report suggests that might have actually led some governments to take another look at nuclear, possibly helping the long-term view for FNPPs.
Interesting. And the trade dynamics. It mentioned tariffs.
Yeah, it specifically mentioned tariffs implemented in 2025, significantly impacting the energy sector by disrupting supply chains.
Okay.
Basically, increased costs for materials, delays getting critical components, things you'd need for energy projects, including potentially FNPPs or related offshore infrastructure. The report said companies were looking at alternative suppliers, but switching isn't easy or cheap.
So even a niche market like this gets affected by bigger geopolitical stuff.
Absolutely. It's not in a vacuum. External factors definitely shape the landscape these projects have to navigate.
Wow. Okay. That gives us a really detailed snapshot based on this report. A market that's, well, niche, but maybe quite significant down the line.
Yeah, it paints a picture of real growth potential, driven by some pretty fundamental needs, but also facing serious hurdles: cost, rules, public feeling, plus those wider global pressures.
So let's bring this back around for you listening. What's the takeaway here? Well, think about those coastal communities needing reliable power, or remote islands struggling with grid connection, maybe even areas facing water shortages. These floating plants, according to this report, are being seriously looked at as a potential answer for exactly those kinds of tricky situations, offering power and increasingly maybe helping with desalination too.
It's definitely a fascinating slice of energy innovation trying to tackle some critical global issues.
It really is, and the report makes it clear there's the promise clean, reliable energy from FNPPs, but also those big hurdles, the costs, the regulations, the public perception. Considering that urgent push for energy security and cutting carbon on one side,
Right.
and these very real, practical, and social challenges on the other, it does leave you with a pretty big question to chew on, doesn't it?
Yeah, what's it going to take?
Exactly. What combination of, say, tech breakthroughs or shifts in global economics, or maybe even just how society views this stuff, what would really be needed to unlock the full potential of floating nuclear power around the world?